"Take those handcuffs off my father." I did not shout it. I did not need to. Somehow, those 6 words were enough to make the entire street go quiet. My 68-year-old father, Walter Cole, stood beside his own mailbox with his hands restrained behind him. Sawdust covered the front of his faded work shirt, and the coffee he had carried outside that morning sat untouched on the porch rail 20 feet away. 3 feet from him stood Cynthia Whitmore, president of the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association. She wore a pale blouse beneath a fitted navy jacket and held a thick red-lettered HOA folder against her chest like a trophy. 10 seconds earlier, she had been smiling. Then she looked past me. The first black SUV turned onto the street. Then the second. Then the third. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just dark windows, government plates, and tires rolling quietly across the clean Virginia pavement. Cynthia's smile faded, but only slightly. She still did not understand what she was looking at. I had spent nearly 7 hours on the road that morning with Supervisory Special Agent Daniel Brooks and Financial Crimes Agent Rachel Mercer. I had expected to finish our work, stop by Dad's house, drink some of the terrible coffee he kept brewing in his garage, and help him replace 2 loose boards along his western fence. Instead, I was looking at a sheriff's deputy standing beside the man who had taught me how to swing a hammer, change a tire, keep my word, and never sign anything I had not read twice. Cynthia pointed toward Dad's house. "He refused to leave after being formally notified," she announced. "The association has documented authority over this property." Dad looked at me. He did not say my name. He did not have to. His expression told me everything. He was embarrassed. Angry too, probably. But he was not afraid. That was Walter Cole. 43 years as a carpenter had taught him something about crooked things. Eventually, if you knew where to put the level, they revealed themselves. I opened my door. Behind me, another door opened. Then another. Daniel stepped onto the pavement. Rachel emerged from the third vehicle carrying a federal case folder. Beneath her arm, 2 more federal personnel remained beside the SUVs. Cynthia noticed Rachel's folder. Her eyes stayed on it for a moment, but the meaning still had not reached her. "Sir," she called toward me, "you need to stay back. This is an active HOA enforcement matter." I looked at my father. Then I looked at the red folder Cynthia was holding. 6 months earlier, she had started trying to push Walter Cole out of his own home 1 violation notice at a time. First it was the edge of his lawn, then his pickup, then his shed, then his fence. Eventually, it became 20 feet of his land. What Cynthia did not know was that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being a simple dispute between an HOA president and a retired carpenter. She thought she had spent 6 months building a case against my father. She had no idea other people had spent those same months following the paperwork around her. And now, standing beside my handcuffed father with half the neighborhood watching from their porches, Cynthia was holding one of the documents they had been waiting to see. To understand why that document mattered, you have to understand Walter Cole and the house behind him. Dad's home was never impressive by modern Hawthorne Ridge standards. It was a 2-story red brick house with white shutters, a narrow porch, a single maple tree near the driveway, and a garage door Dad repainted himself every 6 or 7 years whether it needed paint or not. But almost every inch of the place carried his fingerprints. Dad and my mother, Diane, bought it when I was 8 years old. Back then, Hawthorne Ridge was barely a neighborhood. Empty lots separated the houses. Construction roads became mud whenever it rained. There were enough woods behind our property for me to disappear for an afternoon and still hear Dad whistle when dinner was ready. My clearest childhood memories are not vacations or birthday parties. They are sounds. A table saw starting in the garage. A hammer striking a nail. Dad whistling while he measured lumber. Mom laughing from the kitchen because sawdust had somehow followed him inside again. Dad spent 43 years as a carpenter, and he believed hiring someone to repair something you could repair yourself was almost a character flaw. His tools hung above a scarred oak workbench he had built from leftover lumber. His old Estwing hammer stayed on the same steel hook for decades, its blue grip worn smooth by his hands. After Mom died, the house became quieter, but Dad refused to remodel away the memories. The kitchen doorway still carried pencil marks showing my height from childhood through high school. Beside one slightly crooked line was my name in Mom's handwriting. She had laughed while drawing it, and the pencil had moved. Dad refused to paint over that wall. He treated paperwork with almost the same respect. Property tax receipts, permits, surveys, insurance records, warranties, architectural approvals, old neighborhood correspondence. Everything went into labeled folders inside a cedar document box he had built during a snowstorm when I was 12. The brass latch made a distinctive little click whenever he opened it. I used to tease him about keeping documents nobody would ever need. Dad would tap the lid and say, "Paper remembers what people conveniently forget." At 12, I thought that was something old men said because they liked filing cabinets. Years later, those words would help save his home. I left Virginia after college and eventually became a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Dad almost never mentioned it. If neighbors asked what I did, he simply said his son worked for the government. That suited me. My job did not belong on a neighborhood Facebook page, and Dad never needed my credentials to feel important. He had his own reputation. He repaired porch steps for elderly neighbors without charging them. He sharpened mower blades. He fixed loose railings. He helped replace a widow's broken storm door during a January freeze and refused payment. He knew whose children were away at college, who needed help moving a refrigerator, and whose gutters needed cleaning before winter. People trusted him because Walter never asked what helping them would get him in return. For years, Hawthorne Ridge treated him like exactly the kind of neighbor every community claims to value. Then Cynthia Whitmore became president of the Homeowners Association. Within months, the man who had spent decades helping maintain that neighborhood was suddenly being treated like something that needed to be corrected. Cynthia moved into Hawthorne Ridge several years after Mom died. She bought one of the largest homes near the eastern entrance, a pale stone colonial with 3 garage bays and landscaping trimmed so precisely it looked measured with a ruler. Within 6 months, she was volunteering for committees. Within a year, she was HOA president. Dad noticed the difference before I did. He called me one Sunday evening while I was making dinner. "This place has more rules than residents now." I laughed. Dad did not. The first notice appeared on his front door in March. Improper lawn edging. He stared at it, walked into the garage, came back with a tape measure, and discovered that the grass extended barely a quarter inch beyond the sidewalk. Dad corrected it anyway. 2 weeks later came another notice. His pickup truck was supposedly a commercial vehicle because an old magnetic sign from his carpentry business was still attached to the passenger door. Dad removed the sign. Then Cynthia objected to the stain on his backyard shed. That one irritated him. He walked into the garage and opened the cedar box. Click. 19 years earlier, the HOA had approved that exact stain. Dad photocopied the approval and sent it back. That should have ended the issue. Instead, Cynthia came personally. Dad was sanding a cabinet door when her heels clicked across his driveway. She held out an envelope. Inside was a special assessment for $12,800. The money was supposedly for an entrance expansion, decorative lighting, landscaping improvements, and something described only as community access improvements. Dad read every page before looking at her. "I am not paying $12,800 for a project you have not shown me." Cynthia smiled. "The board has already approved it, Mr. Cole." Dad wiped sawdust from his fingers. "Then show me the vote." Her smile tightened. That was the first time Cynthia learned Walter Cole kept records. At the next association meeting, Dad arrived carrying copies of the bylaws, previous meeting minutes, and budget reports. He asked 3 questions. Why had the projected cost nearly doubled? Why was there no detailed contractor bid attached to the assessment? And why did the map for the proposed community access project appear to extend toward the western edge of his property? That third question changed the room. Several homeowners leaned forward. Someone near the back asked to see the map. Cynthia ended the discussion by promising additional documentation. None arrived. What arrived instead were more violations. Mailbox finish. Fence height. A garden hose visible from the street. Dad stopped treating the letters as isolated complaints. He started treating them as a pattern. Date. Time. Photograph. Envelope. Cedar box. Click. I told him I could drive down that weekend. He laughed. "Ethan, I dealt with building inspectors for 40 years. I can survive a clipboard." Then his voice changed slightly. "Besides, she thinks you were some government office guy. Let her keep thinking that." I laughed too. 3 days later, I stopped laughing. Dad sent me a photograph of a bright red survey mark someone had painted across his western fence post. 20 minutes later, 2 more photographs arrived. Orange survey flags had appeared roughly 60 feet apart along the property line. Nobody asked permission to survey my land, Dad told me. The next morning, he found out exactly what Cynthia had been working toward. At 7:15 the next morning, Dad woke to the diesel rumble of a contractor truck outside his house. 3 survey workers in reflective vests began unloading tripods, measuring equipment, and bundles of wooden stakes. Cynthia stood beside them holding her leather clipboard. Dad walked outside carrying coffee, still wearing the faded gray sweatshirt he used for garage work. "Morning," he said. "What are you measuring?" Cynthia barely looked at him. "Preliminary work for the community access project." Dad looked at the equipment already approaching his property line. "Then preliminarily measure somewhere else." One worker immediately stopped. Cynthia did not. She opened a project map across the hood of the truck. For the first time, Dad saw exactly what she wanted. A new access lane would connect Hawthorne Ridge with a county road west of the subdivision. The route crossed a strip of Dad's property almost 20 feet wide. It passed beside his garage, through his western fence, and across the small patch where Mom used to grow tomatoes. Dad pointed at the route. "That is my land." Cynthia tapped the map with one manicured finger. "The association believes there is an easement." Dad stared at her. "Believes?" The survey workers exchanged glances. Their supervisor asked Cynthia for written authorization allowing them onto the property. She produced HOA documents, but nothing showing Walter's consent. The crew refused to continue. Cynthia left furious. By Friday, Dad had received 4 more violation notices and a warning that unpaid assessments could lead to collection action. The following week, an HOA security vehicle began stopping outside his house twice a day. Someone photographed his driveway, his garage, sometimes Dad himself. Then came a towing warning on his pickup, a demand involving the shed. Another notice claimed his western fence interfered with planned community access. That was when I realized the violations were not the story. They were leverage. Cynthia was creating financial and administrative pressure around one very specific strip of property. I asked Dad to send me the project map. When I enlarged it on my computer, the reason became obvious. Hawthorne Ridge had one primary entrance, but west of Dad's property sat roughly 40 acres being prepared for another residential development. A second road through Dad's land could connect that development with Hawthorne Ridge and provide another route to the county road. 20 feet of my father's property was not an inconvenience. It was infrastructure. Cynthia was not fighting over lawn edging. She needed a road, and Dad's property was the missing link. I called him immediately. "Dad, I am coming home." He went quiet. Then I heard the familiar sound through the phone. Click. "The cedar box." "No," he said. "You finish your work." Another. Pause followed. I heard papers moving across his workbench. Then Dad said, "I found something." 2 minutes later, a photograph appeared on my phone. The document was yellowed at the edges, folded twice, and stamped by the county clerk in 1998. It was an amendment to the original subdivision plat, created when the western parcels were still mostly farmland. One sentence stopped me cold. Any future access across Lot 17 required written consent from the property owner and separate county approval. Lot 17 belonged to Walter Cole. There was no permanent HOA easement. No automatic access right. Nothing Cynthia could create through a board vote. That had been right from the beginning. But as I studied Cynthia's project paperwork again, another detail bothered me. Her map referenced an easement document supposedly recorded 18 months earlier. Dad had never signed one. That meant either Cynthia had made a serious mistake, or somebody had created paperwork Walter Cole knew nothing about. "Photograph everything," I told Dad. "Front and back. Do not give anyone the originals." He heard something in my voice. "What are you seeing?" "I do not know yet." Dad spent the next hour laying documents across his oak workbench and photographing them one at a time. Assessments, meeting records, contractor letters, collection warnings, notices. Then another page appeared on my screen. I stopped scrolling. At the bottom was a signature line labeled Walter James Cole. I knew my father's signature. I had seen it on birthday cards, school permission slips, tax forms, checks, insurance documents, and Christmas cards my entire life. He signed his name the same way he cut trim, carefully and consistently. The signature on the page was wrong. The capital W leaned differently. The spacing between Walter and Cole was too wide. The final stroke was unfamiliar. "Dad, yeah. Did you sign this?" Silence. Then I heard the cedar box close hard. No, his voice changed immediately. She put my name on something? I do not know who did it. I am walking over there. No, Ethan. Dad, listen to me. Do not confront anybody. That was difficult for both of us. I was a federal agent, but I was also Walter Cole's son. Those two facts could not be allowed to contaminate each other. I could not use my position as a private weapon because somebody was threatening my family. What I could do was preserve what Dad had found and disclose exactly how the information had reached me. The next morning, I took the material to Supervisory Special Agent Daniel Brooks. I included a written disclosure explaining my relationship to the property owner and how the documents had been obtained. Daniel read everything twice without saying much. Then he called Rachel Mercer from Financial Crimes. Rachel spent nearly 20 minutes comparing names, dates, mailing addresses, and payment references. Finally, she pointed at the contractor receiving deposits for the Access project. The company shared a mailing address with a property management business appearing elsewhere in several HOA payment records. She checked another page, then another. Ethan, she said, step away from this. I understood immediately. If there was something larger here, it could not become my investigation. So I stepped away. That evening, Dad called. Should I be worried? I looked again at the photograph of Mom's old tomato garden beneath the orange survey flags. Just keep every piece of paper they send you. Dad gave a quiet laugh. Son, I have been doing that since before you learned to read. For the next 5 weeks, I did exactly what Rachel had told me. I stayed out of it. That was harder than Cynthia could ever have imagined. Dad called whenever another envelope arrived, and I listened while he described it from his garage. But he stopped arguing over every violation. Instead, he documented everything. Photograph, date, envelope, click. Meanwhile, I deliberately asked Daniel and Rachel nothing. I knew enough to understand that if Cynthia had crossed a legal line, the cleanest investigation was one my fingerprints never touched. Cynthia apparently interpreted that silence as surrender, and that assumption made her bolder. Then something happened Cynthia had not planned for. The neighbors started talking to each other. Margaret Ellis lived across the street from Dad. She was 74, had known our family for 26 years, and possessed the observational abilities of someone who drank tea every morning beside a front window facing the entire street. Her doorbell camera had recorded contractors stopping near Dad's western property line after dark. On another evening, it captured an HOA security vehicle remaining outside his house long after the driver had finished taking photographs. Dad preserved the footage and passed it along through the proper channels. Then another homeowner started asking questions about a special assessment. Another questioned collection fees that did not appear in the meeting minutes. An elderly couple said they had been threatened with a lien over landscaping charges they believe had already been paid. A retired accountant compared 2 HOA budget statements and noticed that certain totals did not align with the numbers homeowners had originally been shown. None of those things proved anything by themselves. Together, however, they gave people a reason to start checking. Cynthia had built much of her authority on isolation. She needed every homeowner to believe they were the only one being pressured. Once neighbors started comparing dates, notices, contractor names, and payments, the pattern became harder to dismiss. Dad still did not know what Rachel and Daniel were examining. Neither did I. I kept it that way. Cynthia mistook our silence for weakness. Her emails became more aggressive. She referred to the proposed access lane as approved community property, even though the county had issued no authorization. She scheduled another survey. She circulated a board notice claiming Dad had obstructed a legally established easement. Then she sent the email that changed everything. Attached was a scanned copy of the disputed document bearing Walter James Cole's supposed signature. The message warned that continued resistance could result in his removal from what Cynthia called restricted association property. Dad forwarded the email without comment. No angry response. No accusation. No threat. 2 days later, Daniel walked into my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one beside my keyboard. Your father's still keeping everything? Everything. Daniel nodded. Good man. That was all he said. I did not ask what they had found. By then I understood the rhythm. Cynthia pushed. Dad documented. Other homeowners compared notes. Rachel followed the paper. The quieter we became, the more Cynthia seemed determined to prove that she controlled the situation. Then my assignment schedule changed. On Wednesday afternoon, I learned that Daniel, Rachel, several other federal personnel, and I would be traveling toward Virginia the following morning. Their work had brought them in the direction of Hawthorne Ridge. Nobody explained the details to me, and I did not ask for them. I called Dad that evening. He sounded tired but steady. "Come over when you are finished," he said. "I will make coffee." I told him I would. That was the plan. At 7:12 the next morning, Margaret called me instead. Her voice sounded different. "Ethan, there are sheriff's vehicles outside your father's house." Daniel was driving. We were 4 miles from Hawthorne Ridge. "Is Dad outside?" "Yes." There was a pause. "Cynthia is there too." The temperature inside that SUV seemed to change. Rachel stopped reading the folder on her lap and looked toward me. Margaret stayed on the phone. Through the speaker I could hear voices, the low rumble of a diesel engine, and the electronic chirp of a patrol radio. Whatever Cynthia had planned for that morning, she had decided it was finally time to force the issue. Dad had opened his front door shortly before 7 that morning and found Cynthia at the curb with 2 HOA security employees and Deputy Aaron Hayes from the county sheriff's office. Cynthia had brought paperwork. Of course she had. She told Dad the HOA was exercising its access rights, and that contractors would arrive later that morning to begin preliminary work along the western boundary. Dad told her nobody was entering his property. Cynthia immediately handed Deputy Hayes a folder. "This establishes the easement and the association's authority," she said. Dad recognized the document before Hayes finished the first page. His supposed signature was at the bottom. "That is not my signature." Cynthia folded her arms. "We have been through this, Walter." Dad placed his coffee on the porch rail. "No, Cynthia, you have been saying it. That is not the same thing." According to Margaret, Cynthia's face tightened. She ordered one of the HOA security employees to move the temporary barrier Dad had placed near the survey marks. Dad stepped forward and told him to leave it alone. Deputy Hayes asked everyone to remain calm. Dad did. Cynthia kept pushing. She produced another notice claiming the strip beside Dad's garage had effectively transferred into HOA control as part of pending collection proceedings. Dad asked Hayes to contact the county recorder before taking any action. Cynthia objected immediately. "The documents are certified. He has been warned repeatedly." Hayes radioed for clarification, but the answer did not come quickly. Cynthia continued insisting Dad was interfering with lawful access. Then she claimed he was trespassing inside the disputed corridor, on his own property. Hayes was stuck between conflicting documents and 2 people making opposite claims. Eventually, he told Dad he needed to step away from the disputed area while ownership and access rights were verified. Dad refused to pretend the land was no longer his. Not aggressively, not loudly. He simply said, "Deputy, I will cooperate with you, but I will not pretend her paperwork makes my property hers." Margaret's voice suddenly dropped through my phone. "Ethan." I gripped it tighter. "What?" "They are putting him in handcuffs." For 1 second, I forgot every professional instinct I had. Daniel glanced at me from the driver's seat. "Stay professional." "I will." Rachel said nothing. She was already opening the federal case folder beside her. We reached the subdivision entrance. The first black SUV turned onto Dad Street. Then the second. Then the third. Morning sprinklers glittered across perfect lawns. Neighbors stood on porches in robes, work clothes, and slippers. Some were holding phones. I saw the sheriff's cruiser first, then Cynthia's white Lexus, then Dad. He stood beside his mailbox with his hands restrained behind him. Sawdust covered his shirt. Cynthia stood 3 feet away holding the thick red HOA folder against her chest. Dad looked toward the approaching vehicles. Cynthia followed his eyes. For the first time that morning, she stopped talking. Our first SUV slowed. Then the second stopped behind us. The third rolled into place. No sirens. No dramatic rush. Just doors preparing to open. I looked at Dad through the windshield. The man who had spent 43 years building things with his hands was standing restrained on property he had paid taxes on for decades because somebody had produced a piece of paper he said he had never signed. I opened my door. "Take those handcuffs off my father." Cynthia recovered quickly. She raised one hand toward me as though she were directing traffic. "Sir, you need to stay back. This is an active enforcement matter." I walked only far enough to address Deputy Hayes. "Please remove the handcuffs from my father." Cynthia laughed. "Your father?" Her eyes moved between me and the 3 black SUVs. "Being related to him does not give you authority here." You are absolutely right. That answer confused her far more than an argument would have. Behind me, Daniel stepped onto the pavement and introduced himself to Deputy Hayes. Rachel followed with the federal case folder beneath her arm. 2 other federal personnel remained near the vehicles. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody threatened anyone. Daniel showed his credentials and spoke quietly with Hayes. Hayes listened, glanced toward the documents in Cynthia's hands, then toward Dad. A moment later, he walked over and removed the restraints. Dad rubbed one wrist. Then he did something so completely Walter that I almost laughed. He walked to the porch rail, picked up his coffee, took a sip, realized it had gone cold, and frowned at the cup as if that was the morning's real inconvenience. Cynthia was still talking. She insisted the association possessed a certified easement. She insisted Dad had obstructed community property. She insisted the board had documentation proving everything. Every sentence seemed designed to restore the authority she felt slipping away. Rachel looked at the red folder. May I see the signed copy you provided this morning? Cynthia stopped, only for a second. Then pride made the decision for her. She opened the folder, removed the document, and handed it directly to Rachel. Rachel read the first page, then the second. Then she reached the signature page. Walter James Cole. She looked toward Daniel, then back at Cynthia. Thank you. Cynthia's expression shifted. Rachel held the document carefully. We have been looking for the signed copy. Nobody moved. Across the street, a sprinkler clicked slowly from left to right. Cynthia stared at her. What does that mean? Rachel explained that the document would be preserved in connection with an existing federal investigation involving suspected financial misconduct and potentially falsified records associated with HOA funds and related contractors. Cynthia's face lost its color. Daniel informed her that federal personnel had authorization to secure specified association business records and electronic materials relevant to that investigation. For the first time, Cynthia looked directly at my credentials, then at Daniel, then Rachel, then the document she had voluntarily placed in Rachel's hands. This is because of him, she said. She pointed toward Dad. No, I answered. That is the part you never understood. Cynthia had spent 6 months believing she was fighting one retired carpenter over 20 feet of land. She believed the violation notices made her powerful. She believed the assessment made Dad vulnerable. She believed the official letterhead made her version of events more convincing than his. But Dad had done something she never planned for. He had kept everything. Every notice. Every assessment. Every project map. Every meeting record. Every disputed signature. Every date. And once homeowners started comparing those records, the 20 feet beside Dad's garage led somewhere Cynthia never expected. The 3 black SUVs had not come to rescue Walter Cole. They were already coming for records connected to an investigation that had grown beyond his property dispute. Cynthia had simply been standing in his driveway holding one of those records when we arrived. Neighbors watched from both sides of the street. As the balance of the morning changed without anyone raising their voice, Dad walked over to me and placed one sawdust-covered hand on my shoulder. He did not say thank you. I did not expect him to. We both knew the important part was not who I worked for. It was that the piece of paper Cynthia had used to pressure him was finally being examined by people who had no reason to accept her version without checking it. For 6 months, Cynthia had treated paperwork like a weapon. That morning, she learned paperwork could also become a witness. 3 months later, I pulled into Dad's driveway on a cool October Saturday. The first thing I noticed was what was missing. No bright red paint on the western fence. No orange survey flags fluttering beside Mom's old garden. In their place stood a clean property marker installed by a licensed surveyor exactly where Dad had always said the boundary belonged. The county rejected the proposed access route across his property after reviewing the original subdivision records. The disputed easement was removed from the property file. The collection action against Dad was withdrawn. Every HOA penalty directly tied to the dispute was canceled. Cynthia was no longer president. Temporary leadership took over while homeowners organized a new election, and for the first time in years, people actually showed up. Margaret told me they ran out of folding chairs. The broader financial investigation took longer. Investigations like that usually do. Rachel never told me anything I was not entitled to know, and I never asked. What eventually became public was enough. Association records came under review. Questionable contractor payments were examined. Homeowners began challenging charges they had previously been too intimidated to question. The important thing for Dad was simpler. His house was still his house. His garage was still his garage. The western fence was still where it belonged. And the small patch where Mom used to grow tomatoes had not become an access road. Dad did not celebrate Cynthia's downfall. He did not put up a victory sign. He did not walk around Hawthorne Ridge telling everyone he had been right. That was not Walter. When I arrived that Saturday, I found him beside the western fence with his old Estwing hammer hanging from his belt. "You are late," he said. I checked my watch. "It is 8:30. "Exactly. Federal government moves slowly. That excuse probably works better at your office." He handed me a cedar board. We spent the next 2 hours replacing the section of fence disturbed during the dispute. Hammer against nail. Cedar against cedar. For a while, neither of us talked. The rhythm carried across the yard like something I remembered from childhood. At one point, I looked toward the small patch where Mom used to grow tomatoes. Dad had already turned the soil for spring. Nothing dramatic. No monument. No sign announcing what had happened. Just dirt waiting for another season. When we finished, Dad walked into the garage and opened the cedar document box. Click. Inside were decades of permits, receipts, surveys, tax records, architectural approvals, and every red-letter notice Cynthia had ever sent him. He picked up the 1998 subdivision amendment. That single piece of aging paper had been sitting quietly inside the box while Cynthia tried to convince everyone that 20 feet of Walter Cole's property belonged to somebody else. Dad returned it to its folder. "Paper remembers," I said. He smiled. "You finally learned something." Then he closed the lid. Outside, one final board remained loose. Dad handed me his hammer. I set the nail. One strike. Then another. The final blow echoed across the quiet yard. Dad stepped back and examined the fence. Then he looked toward the new property marker. "Think they finally understand where the line is?" I handed him the hammer. "I think they understand a lot more than that." Cynthia Whitmore had believed power meant having the loudest voice in the meeting, the most official-looking letterhead, and enough authority to make an old man question whether his own property still belonged to him. Walter Cole understood power differently. Sometimes it was a survey nobody thought to check. Sometimes it was an old document sitting inside a cedar box. Sometimes it was keeping a receipt for 19 years because somebody might eventually claim it never existed. And sometimes it was simply refusing to throw away the piece of paper somebody else hoped you had forgotten. That morning in Hawthorne Ridge, justice did not arrive with sirens. It did not shout. It did not need to. It arrived quietly in 3 black SUVs, and Cynthia handed it the evidence herself. If you believe no one should be bullied out of property they legally own, hit the like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about homeowners who stand their ground when an HOA crosses the line. And before you go, leave a comment below. What would you have done if you saw your own father standing in handcuffs over property that legally belonged to him? I read the comments, and I would love to hear your answer. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next story.